Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep, letting the day fade away behind you. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. October 31st, 2024. Tonight, we are traveling to the deep woods of Minnesota. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real events. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to honor the resilience of those involved. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. It is often said that silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a heavy physical presence. In the northern reaches of Minnesota, specifically in Crow Wing County, the silence of late October has a weight to it. It presses down on the canopy of the spruce trees like a layer of wet snow. The air here, in the transition between autumn and the first hard frost, carries a very specific scent. It is the smell of drying leaves, of pine needles decomposing on the damp earth, and the crisp, metallic bite of cold that signals the coming winter. Oak Lawn Township is a place defined by the spaces between things. Neighbors here are separated not by fences, but by acres of dense woodland and winding gravel roads. It is a landscape of solitude, where the glow of a porch light is a rare beacon in an ocean of black. To live here is to accept a certain rhythm, a slow, deliberate pace dictated by the seasons. When the sun sets, the world narrows down to the warmth of the hearth and the four walls of the home. The vast distances between houses create a sense of privacy that is cherished, but also a sense of isolation that can be profound. On the night of October 31st, 2024, that silence was deep and seemingly unbreakable. Lorch Road is not a thoroughfare for the impatient. It is a quiet stretch of pavement and gravel that winds through the dense forests east of Brainerd, a path that seems to respect the contours of the land rather than defy them. On most nights, the only traffic is the wind moving through the branches of the red pines, or perhaps the sudden, silent crossing of a deer stepping from the shadows. It is a road that feels ancient, even if the asphalt is relatively new, a road that holds its secrets close to the chest. Halloween night. In the suburbs and cities to the south, this night is characterized by the noise of children, the ringing of doorbells, and the artificial glow of streetlights reflecting off plastic costumes. But here, in the rural quiet of Oak Lawn Township, Halloween is often just another Tuesday. The driveways are too long for trick-or-treaters to navigate in the dark. The houses are set too far back from the road to invite casual visitors. Here, the darkness is not a decoration. It is the natural state of things. If you were to drive down Lorch Road on this particular night, your headlights would cut a narrow tunnel through the pitch black. The trees on either side would flash by in a blur of gray and brown, standing like silent sentinels guarding the interior of the woods. Inside a car, with the heater humming a low, steady note against the chill, you would feel entirely alone in the universe. The dashboard lights would cast a soft green glow on your hands, and the rhythmic thrum of tires on the pavement would be the only evidence of human activity for miles. It was a night for staying in. The temperature was dropping, the moisture in the air turning to frost on the windshields of parked cars. Inside the homes scattered along this route, families were settling into their evening routines. Televisions flickered with blue light in living rooms, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Wood stoves were fed, the smell of wood smoke drifting up from chimneys to mingle with the cold night air. It was a scene of perfect, mundane domesticity. But the geography of solitude is fragile. The very isolation that provides peace also removes the safety net of immediate witness. In a place where a scream might only be heard by the trees, the security of the home relies entirely on the unspoken social contract between neighbors. It relies on the belief that the silence outside is benevolent. On this night, however, a vehicle was moving through the dark that would challenge that belief. A white 2017 Chrysler Pacifica was navigating the curves of the road, its headlights sweeping across the trunks of the pines. Inside the homes along Lorch Road, the residents were unaware of the disruption that was forming. They were unaware that the sanctity of their quiet night was about to be breached. They simply went about the business of living, washing dishes, folding laundry, preparing for sleep. The wind picked up slightly, rattling the last of the dry oak leaves against the window panes, a sound like dry paper being crumpled. It was the only warning the night would offer. The darkness in Crow Wing County is not empty. It is full of the unseen. It holds the history of the land, the cycles of the forest, and on rare occasions, the sudden, sharp intrusion of human tragedy. As the clock ticked toward the late hours, the silence of Lorch Road began to thin, stretched taut by an approaching tension. The stage was set not by malice, but by the simple, indifferent geography of a place where help is miles away, and the night is very, very long. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep, letting the day fade away behind you. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. Tonight, we are traveling to the deep woods of Minnesota. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real events. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to honor the resilience of those involved. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. We often believe that silence is empty. We think of it as a void, a lack of noise, or a simple pause in the rhythm of the day. But in the deep north, silence is not empty. It is heavy. It has a weight and a texture, pressing down on the canopy of the forest like the first heavy snow of the season. Tonight, we travel to a place where that silence is the primary language of the landscape. We are going to Crow Wing County, Minnesota. It is a region defined not by its cities, but by the spaces between them. It was late October, the time of year when the vibrant golds and reds of the autumn leaves have faded into a uniform, brittle brown on the forest floor. The air in this part of the world changes before the snow falls. It takes on a specific, metallic scent, clean, sharp, and smelling faintly of iron and cold water. It is the smell of a season turning, of the earth locking itself away for the long sleep of winter. In Oak Lawn Township, the neighbors are not separated by fences or hedges, but by acres of dense woodland. Here, privacy is not a luxury. It is a geological fact. The distance between front porches is measured in fractions of a mile, and the lights of a passing car are a rare event after dark. It is a place where you can stand on your front step and hear nothing but the wind moving through the upper branches of the spruce trees. a sound that mimics the ocean in its steady, rhythmic rise and fall. On the night of October 31st, 2024, that silence was deep and seemingly unbreakable. The Halloween festivities that might have animated the streets of Brainerd or the suburbs of Minneapolis did not reach this far into the woods. There were no trick-or-treaters walking along the gravel shoulders of Lorch Road. There were no porch lights flickering in anticipation of visitors. There was only the vast, indifferent darkness of the rural night, and the frost beginning to form intricate, crystalline patterns on the window panes of warm houses. Lorch Road is a quiet stretch of pavement that winds east of Brainerd, cutting a gray line through the dense tapestry of the forest. To drive it at night is to travel through a tunnel of trees, where the headlights catch only the reflective eyes of deer or the pale bark of a birch tree standing sentinel in the ditch. It is a road used by those who live there, and few others. It is a place where the rhythm of life is dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, and where the night is respected as a time of stillness. At this hour, the world feels paused. If you're still awake, perhaps fighting a bout of insomnia or simply taking a pain-enforced nap, you understand this specific quality of time. It is the hour when the house settles, the timber shrinking in the cold, making small, sharp sounds that echo in the quiet. On Lorch Road, the only movement came from the wind stripping the last of the oak leaves from the branches, sending them skittering across the asphalt with a dry, scratching sound. But disruption rarely announces itself with a shout. Often it begins quietly. A change in the pattern, a light where there should be darkness, a sound that does not belong to the wind. In the isolation of Oak Lawn Township, safety relies on this pattern. You know the sound of your neighbor's truck. You know the time the school bus passes. You know that when the sun goes down, the world is supposed to stop. Lyle Maska was a man who understood these patterns better than most. At 62 years old, he was a fixture of this landscape, the kind of neighbor whose presence was a form of security, a lighthouse in the sea of trees. He was not a man who sought the spotlight, nor was he a man who lived a life of loud events. He was, by all accounts, a steady presence, a man who lived his life with the quiet dignity that the North demands. We can imagine his evening routine, a ritual familiar to anyone who has lived alone in a quiet house. The locking of the door, not out of fear, but out of habit. The lowering of the thermostat, the dimming of the lights. Lyle was the kind of neighbor who watched out for others, the type of man who would notice if a car was parked where it shouldn't be, or if smoke was rising from a chimney that had been cold for days. In rural communities, this is not called being nosy. It is called being a neighbor. It is a survival mechanism. You watch the woods, and the woods watch you. Lyle's home was his sanctuary. Inside, away from the biting wind of late October, there would have been the hum of a refrigerator, the soft glow of a television or a reading lamp, the comfortable clutter of a life lived in one place for a long time. It was a warm space, insulated against the encroaching winter. But outside, the atmosphere was shifting. The silence of Lorch Road was about to be broken, not by the natural elements, but by a human decision. It is a tragedy of proximity. We often think of danger as something that travels great distances to find us. But sometimes, The disruption comes from just down the road. Lyle Maska, in his role as the watchful neighbor, would soon step out of the safety of his home and into the cold night air. He would do so not because he was looking for trouble, but because he saw something that didn't fit the pattern. He saw a glow that was too bright, a flicker that was too erratic to be a porch light. Fire is rarely silent. Even from a distance, it breathes. It pops and hisses as it consumes. In the pitch black of a rural night, a fire is a visual anomaly that demands attention. It draws the eye, and inevitably, it draws concern. Lyle Mask looked out into the night and saw the ember growing. He saw the smoke rising, darker than the sky, blotting out the few stars that managed to pierce the cloud cover. And so he made a choice. It was the choice of a good neighbor. He decided to check. He decided to see if help was needed. He stepped out of his warm house, leaving the sanctuary of his living room, and walked into the driveway. The gravel would have crunched under his boots, a loud sound in the stillness. The cold air would have hit his face, sharp and biting. He was moving toward the disturbance, unaware that the disturbance was watching him back. The events that followed happened quickly. A chaotic burst of violence that stands in stark contrast to the slow, peaceful life Lyle had led. But we must remember him not for the moment of his death, but for the impulse that led him there. He walked toward the fire because he cared. He stepped into the dark because he thought someone might need him. The disruption came in the form of Chad Anarud, 36 years old, a man whose internal chaos had spilled over into the external world. There was a confrontation. Words were exchanged in the dark, their meaning likely lost to the wind. But the intent was clear. Anarud, caught in a spiral of his own making, viewed the neighbor's concern as interference. He later told police that Lyle had stuck his nose where it didn't belong. It is a chilling phrase. It implies that observing, that caring, is a trespass. But on Lorch Road, looking out for one another was the law of the land. The gunshot that followed shattered the silence of the township. It was a sound that didn't belong, a sharp, artificial crack that echoed off the trunks of the pines and rolled through the valley. Lyle Maska fell in his driveway. The cold ground received him. The silence rushed back in immediately, as it always does after a gunshot. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest. It was the stunned, horrified silence of a crime scene. A life ended in the quiet of his own property, under the vast canopy of the Minnesota sky. But the night was not over. The violence that had claimed Lyle Mask was not a singular event. It was the beginning of a departure. Anarud was not alone. In the white 2017 Chrysler Pacifica that sat idling nearby, there were others. A pregnant woman, 4 children, aged 14, 11, 7, and 3. We can only imagine the atmosphere inside that vehicle. The heater likely hummed with a steady, oblivious rhythm, pushing warm air into the cabin. The dashboard lights would have cast a soft, green glow on the faces of the children. At ages 7 and 3, the younger ones might have been asleep, or hovering in that groggy state between waking and dreaming. The older ones, 14 and 11, would have been wide awake, their eyes adjusting to the darkness outside, trying to understand the shadows moving beyond the glass. The car was a bubble, a small, sealed environment of warmth moving through the freezing night. When Anirudh entered the vehicle, the dynamic shifted. The car was no longer just a mode of transport. It became a cage. He put the vehicle in gear, and the tires crunched over the same gravel where Lyle lay. They pulled away from the scene, away from the fire that was now beginning to consume the nearby residents, and turned onto the dark asphalt of Lorch Road. They moved away from the orange glow of the flames, driving deeper into the darkness of the county. The woods swallowed the taillights of the Pacifica as it picked up speed. Inside, the children were huddled together. In moments of fear, we instinctively seek physical contact. We can picture the 14-year-old holding the hand of the 7-year-old, the silent communication of siblings who know that they must remain quiet to stay safe. The car moved south and west, navigating the winding roads that connect the scattered townships of Crow Wing County. The rain began to fall harder, drumming against the roof of the van, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that masked the tension inside. To anyone passing them on the highway, they were just another set of headlights, a family traveling late at night, perhaps returning from a trip or heading to an early morning appointment. There was nothing to indicate the terror that sat in the driver's seat or the fragility of the lives in the back. Back on Lorch Road, the fire continued to burn. It grew in intensity, a beacon in the night. It was this light, this unnatural dawn in the middle of the night, that eventually drew the attention of others. But for now, the scene was empty. The wind blew through the trees, the frost continued to form on the grass, and the silence, broken for a moment, began to settle heavy and cold over the tragedy. Time moves differently when the world is asleep. Minutes stretch into hours. For the occupants of the white Pacifica, the journey must have felt endless. The passing of mile markers, the flash of street lamps, the darkness of the open fields, it all blurred into a singular, continuous motion. They were drifting, untethered from their home, moving through the void of the Minnesota night. At 1:50 a.m., the first response began. The Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office received the call. It was a report of a shooting, a report of fire. The dispatch went out over the radio waves, a silent signal traveling at the speed of light, waking deputies who were patrolling the quiet highways. Reflect off the wet asphalt, off the pine, reflect off the wet asphalt, off the pine needles, off the siding of the burning house. The deputies arrived on Lorch Road to find a scene of devastation. The fire was roaring now, consuming the structure, the heat intense enough to push back the cold of the night. They found Lyle Mask. They confirmed what the silence had already suggested. But as they secured the scene, as they spoke to neighbors who had been roused from their sleep by the commotion, a new realization began to take hold. There were people missing. The investigation shifted gears immediately. It went from a scene assessment to a manhunt. They identified the missing vehicle, a white 2017 Chrysler Pacifica. They identified the occupants, a pregnant mother, 4 children. The timeline was established. The suspect was gone, and he had taken the most vulnerable with him. The first responders stepped into a scene where the fire was fading, but the mystery was just beginning. The woods stood tall and impassive around them. The rain hissed as it hit the embers of the house. And somewhere out there, in the vast network of roads that crisscrossed the state, a white van was moving through the dark. This is the moment where the story expands. It is no longer just about a driveway on Lowerch Road. It is about the entire state. It is about the technology of protection. The Amber Alert system is a digital net, cast wide and fast. It is a mechanism designed to turn every citizen into a witness, every phone into a watchtower. At that hour, most of Minnesota was asleep. Phones lay dark on nightstands. Billboards along the highways displayed generic messages. But in the control centers, the data was being entered. The description of the Pacifica, the license plate, the names of the children. The signal was prepared, ready to be sent out into the ether, to travel silently across the fiber optic cables buried deep in the frozen ground, waiting to light up screens and alert the waking world that something was wrong. The night was far from over. The search was just beginning, and as the deputies worked in the flickering light of the dying fire, the snow began to fall, light and dusting, covering the tracks, covering the scars on the land, covering the silence with a fresh white sheet. The digital signal had been cast, a silent net thrown over the sleeping state. But the physical world remained vast and stubbornly dark. Between the moment the alert lit up the screens of the waking world and the arrival of the dawn, there existed a heavy, stretching void. It was the time of night when the roads are surrendered entirely to the long-haul truckers and the shadows. A time when the silence of the North Woods feels less like peace and more like a held breath. The white Chrysler Pacifica was out there somewhere, moving through this void. It was a single mechanical point of heat and motion, navigating the miles of asphalt that wind through the lake country. Inside that vehicle, the heater would have been humming, a mundane drone fighting against the encroaching chill of November. We can imagine the interior not as a scene of panic, but as a suspended reality. A small, traveling bubble where 4 children and a mother waited for the night to end. The rhythm of the tires on the pavement would have been hypnotic. A steady thrum, 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 marking the passing of miles, moving them further away from the fading glow of the fire on Lowerch Road and deeper into the anonymity of Morrison County. Back in Oak Lawn Township, the urgency of the initial response began to settle into the methodical pace of an investigation. The fire that had drawn the first gaze of the deputies was now being tamed, the orange flames giving way to rising columns of steam and gray smoke that drifted sluggishly into the tree line. The house was gone, reduced to charred timber and memory, but the immediate danger at that specific coordinate had passed. What remained was the waiting. Law enforcement officers sat in their cruisers, the engines idling to keep the windshields clear of the frost that was beginning to form. They watched the empty roads. They listened to the crackle of the radio, waiting for a voice to cut through the static with a sighting. It is a specific kind of patience required in these moments, a discipline that asks you to remain vigilant while the rest of the world drifts off. The woods stood watch alongside them, the pines motionless, their branches heavy with the damp air, bearing witness to the long, quiet hours between 2 a.m. and the sunrise. Time moves differently when the world is asleep. Minutes stretch into hours, and the distance between towns seems to expand. For the community, for the officers, and perhaps even for the occupants of that white van, the night felt endless. But the earth continued its slow rotation. The moon began its descent, and slowly, imperceptibly. The deep black of the sky began to dilute, turning to a bruised purple, and then to the steel gray of a Minnesota morning. The sun did not burst over the horizon on November 1st. Rather, it revealed the world slowly, lifting the veil of darkness to expose the frost-covered fields of Morrison County. It was 7:15 a.m. The light was flat and gray, the kind of illumination that offers no warmth but brings the gift of clarity. The shadows that had hidden the white Chrysler Pacifica retreated, leaving the vehicle exposed against the muted browns and grays of the late autumn landscape. It was here, in the quiet light of the morning, that the search came to an end. Law enforcement located the vehicle. There were no sirens screaming through the dawn, no chaotic chase that shattered the morning calm. Instead, the resolution was procedural, swift, and ultimately safe. The digital net had done its work. The eyes of the community, even those heavy with sleep, had done their work. Chad Anarud was taken into custody without incident. The disruption he had caused, the fear he had sown across 2 counties, was contained. But the most important discovery was found inside the vehicle. The mother, the 14-year-old, the 11-year-old, the 7-year-old, and the 3-year-old. They were found unharmed. It is a word that carries a profound weight in stories like this. Unharmed. After the fire, after the gunshot, after the long drive through the hollow night, they were safe. We can imagine the collective exhale of the deputies, the dispatchers, and the family members waiting by their phones. The physical safety of the children and their mother remained intact. The nightmare of the night before had not followed them into the day. They were alive. They were together. And as they were transferred into the care of those who would protect them, the sun finally broke through the cloud cover, casting a pale, validating light on the road home. The seasons turned quickly in the north. The gray mornings of November soon gave way to the deep, insulating snows of December and January. The scars of the fire on Lorch Road were buried under layers of white, the land healing itself in the way it always does, through silence and time. The story that had begun with a disruption of the peace would end in a courtroom, a place designed for order and finality. We travel forward now to February 17th. The winter was still holding firm, but the days were beginning to lengthen. In the controlled, quiet environment of the courthouse, there was no drama, only the steady administration of justice. Chad Anarud stood before the court. There was no long, drawn-out trial to force the victims to relive the journey. Instead, there was a plea. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping. The system, often criticized for its slowness, moved with a decisive weight. The sentence was handed down. Life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 30 years. The other charges, the arson that claimed the house, the other assaults, were dismissed as part of the agreement, streamlining the path to closure. It was a calculated legal conclusion, ensuring that the man who broke the silence of Oak Lawn Township would be removed from it for decades. Justice was served, cold and firm. But as the gavel fell, marking the end of the legal chapter, our thoughts returned to the beginning, to the neighbor, to Lyle Maska. He was a man of 62 years, a fixture of his road, a northern neighbor who looked out for those around him. He did not ask to be a hero, nor did he ask to be part of a tragedy. He simply saw a disruption and stepped forward. Lyle's presence on that road was a form of security, a lighthouse in the sea of trees. And though he is gone, the spirit of that watchfulness remains. The community he left behind is still there, still watching out for one another, still keeping the Insomnia Club company during the long nights. The silence has returned to Lorch Road, but it is no longer the silence of fear. It is the silence of respect. The trees stand watch, the snow covers the ground, and the memory of a good neighbor is preserved in the quiet dignity of the North Woods. The yellow tape that once cordoned off the driveway has long since been removed, taken down by the same quiet authority that put it up. The flashing lights of the emergency vehicles, which once painted the trunks of the spruce trees in chaotic shades of red and blue, have faded into memory. Lorch Road has returned to its natural state, a ribbon of gravel and asphalt winding through the deep woods, flanked by the stoic presence of the pines. In the days and weeks following that October night, the seasons continued to turn with an indifference that is, in its own way, a form of comfort. The autumn leaves, which were dry and brittle on the night of the fire, eventually gave way to the first heavy snows of November. The scars left on the land, the blackened timber of the structure, the tire tracks in the mud, the disturbed earth, were slowly covered by a pristine blanket of white. Nature has a way of reclaiming the spaces we disrupt. It does not hold grudges, and it does not pause for grief. It simply continues. The wind that howls through Crow Wing County carries with it the chill of the Canadian Shield, blowing across the lakes and through the valleys, scrubbing the air clean. The smoke that once rose into the night sky has dissipated, its particles scattered by the breeze, leaving the air crisp and cold once more. For the residents of Oak Lawn Township, the rhythm of life has resumed. The mail is delivered. The snowplows clear the roads in the early hours of the morning, their amber lights flashing rhythmically against the dark. Neighbors still wave to one another as they pass, perhaps with a lingering sense of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the fragility of the peace they share. But the fear that briefly pierced this quiet community has receded, replaced by the enduring stillness of the North. We often talk about the violence of the storm, but we rarely speak of the calm that follows. It is a heavy, settling calm. It is the sound of a world taking a deep breath. The trees, those ancient sentinels that line the property boundaries, stand watch as they always have. They have seen generations come and go. They have weathered ice storms and droughts, fires and floods, and they remain. There is a deep, resonant safety in that permanence. The snow falls softly now, covering the ground in layers of insulation. It muffles the sound of passing cars, turning the world into a quiet, padded room. Underneath that snow, the earth rests. The roots of the trees are dormant, waiting for the spring that will inevitably come. It is a cycle of rest and renewal, a reminder that nothing, not even the longest night, lasts forever. As we move further away from the events of that night, they become less like a present reality and more like a story written on paper, filed away in the archives of the county. The legal proceedings have ended. The gavel has fallen. The questions have been answered, and the doors of the courthouse have been locked for the night. The machinery of justice has done its work, and now it too falls silent. For the family involved, for the mother and her 4 children, the road ahead is one of healing. But they are safe. That is the anchor we must hold on to as we let this story go. They were found. They were brought back from the uncertainty of the night into the clarity of the morning. They are no longer in that white van moving through the dark. They are somewhere warm, somewhere secure, living their lives one day at a time, moving forward just as the seasons do. And for Lyle Maska, the neighbor who stood watch, his memory is now part of the landscape. He is woven into the fabric of that quiet road. He is remembered not for how he died, but for the instinct that defined his life, the instinct to care, to notice, to be a part of the community. In the silence of the winter woods, there is a dignity that befits a man like him, a quiet respect that settles over the driveway where he lived, as peaceful as the falling snow. Now, as we reach the end of our journey tonight, I want you to turn your attention away from the frozen roads of Minnesota and back to the space you are in right now. Let the details of the case fade. Let the names and the dates dissolve like breath on a cold window. They are no longer your burden to carry. The file is closed. The investigation is complete. The heavy doors of the archive have swung shut, and the lock has clicked into place. You are left only with the quiet. Notice the room around you. The shadows that stretch across the floor are not hiding anything. They are simply the absence of light, a soft blanket that allows your eyes to rest. The walls that surround you are strong. The roof above you is a shield against the elements. You are in a safe space, a sanctuary that you have built for yourself, far removed from the cold winds of the north. If you are still awake with me, if you are a member of our late-night insomnia club, I want you to take a moment to adjust your position. Feel the weight of the blankets pressing down on you. That pressure is a reminder of your security. It is a physical signal to your body that there is no need to run, no need to fight, no need to be alert. The waking world has been put on pause. Listen to the sound of the silence in your own home. It might be the hum of a fan, the distant rhythm of traffic, or simply the sound of your own breathing. Let that sound become a rhythm that rocks you, just as the snow insulates the ground in Oak Lawn Township. Let the comfort of your bed insulate you from the worries of the day. There is nothing you need to solve right now. There are no puzzles left to piece together. The detectives have gone home. The lawyers have packed their briefcases. The reporters have turned off their cameras. The story is over. All that remains is the feeling of relief that comes when a storm has passed, and the house is still standing. You have walked with us through the darkness, and now you have arrived at the destination. It is a place of rest, a place where the mind can stop spinning and simply drift. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of that woods we spoke of, but you are not cold. You are watching the snow fall from behind a thick pane of glass, safe and warm inside a cabin with a fire burning in the hearth. You can see the beauty of the winter night, the way the moonlight catches the frost on the branches, the deep blue of the shadows, but you cannot feel the chill. You are an observer, protected and at peace. The woods keep their secrets, and the road returns to silence. The events of that night are now just paper in a file, while the trees stand watch as they always have. They stand guard over the silence, ensuring that the quiet remains unbroken. Allow your eyes to grow heavy. Allow the tension in your shoulders to release, melting away like ice in the spring sun. You have done enough for today. You have listened. You have witnessed. And now, you have earned this rest. Whatever time it is, wherever you are tonight, know that you are not alone in this quiet. Across the miles, others are drifting off just as you are, carried by the same steady voice, united in the search for peace. The night is not something to be feared. It is simply a curtain drawn across the world to allow it to sleep. Let that curtain fall now. Let the screen fade to black. Let the noise of the world recede until there is nothing left but the gentle rhythm of your own heartbeat, slow and steady. You are safe where you are. Let the quiet of the north carry you. Good night. But the story of a night like this is not composed solely of actions and endings. It is built from the small sensory details that fill the spaces between the headlines. To truly understand the weight of those hours, we must look closer at the quiet environments that held these lives while the rest of the world slept. We return now to the interior of that white Chrysler Pacifica, moving steadily through the deep darkness of Crow Wing County. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was a sealed capsule, separated from the freezing air outside by only a few millimeters of glass and steel. The engine hummed with a low, constant vibration, a sound that usually lulls passengers to sleep on long road trips. Here, it was the only consistent noise, a mechanical heartbeat driving them forward into the void. The heater was running, pushing warm, dry air through the vents, creating a stark contrast to the biting frost forming on the trees just feet away. There's a specific smell to a family vehicle that has been lived in. It is a mixture of old fabric, the faint, lingering scent of stale coffee from a travel mug, and the sweetness of children's snacks that have fallen between the seats. In the dark, these scents become amplified. The dashboard cast a soft, artificial green glow across the front seats, illuminating the speedometer and the fuel gauge in a ghostly light. It was a small, dim universe of its own, floating through the immense blackness of the Minnesota woods. The rhythmic sound of the tires on the pavement provided a hypnotic backdrop. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Occasionally, the pitch would change as the wheels crossed a patch of rougher asphalt or crunched over stray gravel on the shoulder, sending a brief vibration through the chassis. The windshield wipers were likely still, as the rain had turned to a mist, but the glass would have been streaked with the residue of the damp night, refracting the headlights of the rare passing car into starbursts of glare. For the children in the back, the world outside was nothing but a wall of shadow. The trees were indistinguishable from the sky, a solid mass of darkness that rushed past the windows. Inside, the air was thick with the humidity of 7 people breathing in a confined space. The windows would have started to fog around the edges, creating a soft, white vignette that further isolated them from the reality of the road. It was a bubble of warmth moving through a cold ocean, a suspended state where time seemed to stretch and warp, measured not in minutes, but in the passing of mile markers and the steady drone of the transmission. While that physical vehicle moved through the geography of the county, another journey was taking place. One that was invisible, silent, and traveling at the speed of light. This was the journey of the Amber Alert, a digital net being cast across the state while its citizens lay in their beds. We often think of an alert as a loud noise, a jarring alarm that breaks the peace. But before the sound, there is the signal. Imagine the data leaving the dispatch center, converted instantly into packets of information. It traveled through fiber optic cables buried deep beneath the frozen ground, lines of glass and light that crisscross the rural landscape like a hidden nervous system. These cables run under the very roads the Pacifica was traveling on, silent rivers of data flowing beneath the tires. The signal moved from the ground to the air, beamed up to the cell towers that stand like lonely sentinels above the tree line. In the dead of night, these towers are usually dormant, handling only the occasional handshake of a passing phone. But in this moment, they came alive with a unified purpose. The invisible waves radiated outward, passing through the pine forests, through the walls of farmhouses, and through the brick facades of apartment buildings in Brainerd and beyond. It was a silent web of protection, expanding mile by mile, covering the county in a digital blanket of awareness. The signal found its way to thousands of devices simultaneously. On nightstands across Minnesota, screens lit up in the dark. For many, it was a silent notification, a glow that washed over the ceiling for a brief second before fading back to black. It traveled to digital billboards on the highways, changing the message from traffic updates to a plea for vigilance. It was a technological guardian angel, moving faster than any car could drive, racing ahead of the suspect to warn the world that he was coming. It is a comforting thought that even in the deepest isolation of a rural night, we are connected by these invisible threads, a safety net woven from light and code that waits to catch those who fall. The night, however long it feels, eventually gives way to the physics of the planet. The rotation of the Earth continues, regardless of the human drama playing out on its surface. And so, the darkness began to dilute, turning from an impenetrable black to a deep, bruised purple, and finally to the steel gray of a November dawn. At 7:15 a.m., the light in Morrison County has a specific, heavy quality. The sun does not burst over the horizon in a blaze of gold. Instead, it struggles to pierce the cloud cover, filtering through as a diffused, flat illumination. It is a light that reveals the world in high contrast. The frost that had formed during the night clung to the tall grass in the ditches, turning the landscape into a sea of brittle silver. The trees, stripped of their autumn leaves by the wind, stood like charcoal sketches against the pale sky. The air at this hour was still and sharp. If you were to step outside, you would see your breath misting in front of you, vanishing almost instantly into the cold. The moisture on the roads had frozen in patches, creating dull, matte surfaces that looked like dry pavement, but were slick with black ice. It was a quiet morning. The birds had not yet begun to sing, and the traffic was sparse. Just the occasional truck rumbling in the distance, its exhaust pluming white and thick. This was the light that finally fell upon the white Chrysler Pacifica. It did not look like a vessel of terror in the gray morning. It simply looked like a car parked on the side of the road, covered in a thin layer of dew. The condensation on the metal caught the flat light, making the vehicle blend into the muted tones of the surroundings. The world was waking up. In the farmhouses nearby, lights were turning on in kitchens, coffee was being brewed, and the routine of a Friday morning was beginning. There is a profound dissonance in how normal the world looks after a tragedy. The sun rises just as it did the day before, But in that specific quality of light, at 5 o'clock, the frost forms the same delicate patterns on the fence posts. The cows in the nearby fields graze with their heads down, indifferent to the history that has just occurred. But in that specific quality of light, at 7:15 a.m., there was a sense of a held breath being released. The shadows that had hidden the vehicle were gone. The mystery of where they had vanished to was resolved by the simple, undeniable presence of the car sitting there in the daylight. The gray sky seemed to lower itself over the landscape, a protective lid placed over the chaotic events of the night. It was a morning that promised nothing but cold and quiet, a return to the slow, steady rhythm of the north. The nightmare had been contained within the darkness, and as the light grew stronger, revealing the details of the bark on the trees and the gravel on the road, the fear began to evaporate with the morning mist. The world was solid again. The trees were just trees. The road was just a road. And the silence that settled over Morrison County was not the silence of waiting, but the silence of peace returned. We must also consider the spaces that these families return to. When the news cameras turn off and the police tape is taken down, the physical locations of these stories remain. They stand as silent witnesses to the resilience of those who inhabit them. The concept of home in northern Minnesota is inextricably linked to the idea of shelter against the elements. A house here is more than just walls. It is a fortress against the cold, a warm heart in a frozen body. In the days following the event, the community of Oak Lawn Township began the slow process of knitting itself back together. It is a process that happens in small, unseen gestures. A neighbor clearing snow from a driveway without being asked. A casserole left on a porch step, wrapped in foil to keep the heat in. The specific sound of a snowplow scraping the road in the distance. A noise that signals that the infrastructure of daily life is functioning, that the roads are being cleared, that the path forward is being opened. The burned residence, the site of the initial disruption, would eventually be covered by the winter snow. Snow in this part of the world is a great equalizer. By January, the site would look By January, the site would look no different than the surrounding fields, a smooth, undulating drift of white under a pale blue sky. This is the way the North heals. It does not rush to erase the past, but simply covers it, layer by layer, season by season. The silence returns to Lowersh Road, heavy and comforting. The pine trees, which have stood watch for decades, continue their vigil. They catch the wind in their branches, creating that familiar rushing sound, like a distant ocean that lulls the residents to sleep. Safety is often defined by the absence of noise. It is the sound of a furnace kicking on in the basement, a low rumble that vibrates through the floorboards. It is the ticking of a clock in the hallway. It is the creak of a house settling as the temperature drops at night. These are the sounds of a world that is working as it should. For the family and for the neighbors, the return of these mundane sounds marks the true end of the ordeal. As we step back from this story, zooming out from the specific road, from the specific county to the state as a whole, we see a vast tapestry of lights flickering in the dark. Each light represents a home, a sanctuary where people are sleeping, safe in the knowledge that the systems designed to protect them, the alerts, the responders, the community itself, held firm. The net caught them. The morning came. And so, We leave them there, in the quiet of the winter. The story is now just paper in a file, stored away in a cabinet in a municipal building. But the peace that follows is real. It is in the air you breathe. It is in the heavy quilt pulled up to the chin. It is in the knowledge that the night, for all its vastness, eventually gives way to the dawn. You can let go of the details now. The car has stopped. The signal has faded. The sun has risen and set many times since that November morning. All that remains is the stillness. Let that stillness wrap around you like a heavy blanket. Let the rhythm of your own breathing match the slow, steady pulse of the sleeping world. You are safe. The door is locked. The night is yours to rest in. Drift, float, sleep.